We've frustrated everyone, both because of the economic damage that they have to withstand, the energy crisis that they're currently going through. As Donald Trump keeps saying over and over again, it's not our problem, it's your problem, even though he caused the problem to begin with. It's a spectacular defeat. I told you. Oh my God. Wait, what? Trump says he's not controlled by Israel? I didn't see this one. And if Iran's new leaders regime change are smart. Israel never talked me into the war with Iran. The results of October 7th added to my lifelong opinion that Iran can never have a nuclear weapon did. I watch and read the fake news pundits and polls in total disbelief. 90% of what they say are lies and made up stories, and the polls are rigged just as much as the 2020 election was rigged. Just like the results in Venezuela, which the media doesn't like talking about, the results in Iran will be amazing. And if Iran's new leaders, regime change, are smart, Iran can have a great and prosperous future. Oh my God. God, he is in his washed era. He's chopped. He's chopped and he's unk. Also, you know, good luck convincing people that Israel doesn't control you, okay, or your cabinet. After you literally came out of the gate swinging with the Israel is the reason why we had to bomb Iran. It's not going to happen. You know what I mean? Oh my God. And he keeps writing these long ass fucking truth social posts. He's so fucking washed, dude. He's washed as hell. We're going to start with Iran threatens to retaliate after the U.S. military seizes Iranian cargo ship. We're going to get into all of that and all. We'll look at the Trump responses and more, but I got to pee real quick.
Not be over soon. This video provided by the U.S. military appears to show Marines seizing an Iranian cargo ship near the Strait of Hormuz, a first in this war. We have learned more U.S. forces are headed to the region, including an additional aircraft carrier. And Iran now says it never agreed to a second round of negotiations, despite claims by President Trump. Charlie Daggett has been following every twist of from Tel Aviv on this story. Charlie, good morning. There's a lot of twists and turns in this story. More to come, I'm sure. Good morning.
Good morning, Gail. More to come. Now, with the clock running down on that ceasefire, tensions are only cranking up. Iran shutting down the Strait of Hormuz, opening fire on passing oil tankers. And U.S. officials I spoke with this morning say the crew of that Iranian ship just ignored warnings after a 6-hour standoff. First, the U.S. Navy destroyer warns the crew of the Iranian cargo ship Tosca.
Motor vessel Tosca, vacate your engine room. Vacate your engine room. We're prepared to subject you to disabling fire.
Several rounds are fired toward the vessel. Later, under the cover of darkness, U.S. Marines launch a helicopter raid, rappelling onto the deck of the stricken ship, which is now in U.S. custody. Central Command said while more than 24 commercial vessels have been turned back, this is the first seizure since the U.S. blockade was imposed last week. U.S. officials said the Tosca, headed toward Iran, failed to comply with orders despite 6 hours of warnings.
It's so funny to like celebrate being the military force and the naval force that's supposed to keep all of these waterways open, and then to turn around and do this, and then, you know, literally be like, yeah, we're pirates now. If Iran can do it, why can't we? It's cool, I guess. Like, we've just decided America is in its fuck it stage. America has decided to you know, take a different approach nowadays, where it's like, yeah, whatever. Yeah, we've decided we're gonna fuck around. Okay, hopefully we don't ever find out. You know, it's very mask off lately.
Iran has threatened to retaliate, the most serious threat yet to the fragile ceasefire that expires this week. While the U.S. military presence in the region continues to grow, officials tell CBS News the USS Gerald R. Ford, which has now undergone the longest aircraft carrier deployment since the Vietnam War, has rejoined the fight, transiting the Suez Canal to the Red Sea. More than 50,000 U.S. troops and the USS Abraham Lincoln carrier remain in this region, and more are on the way. A third carrier, the George H.W. Bush, is due to arrive by the end of the month, to be joined by thousands more Marines sailing from the Asia-Pacific region.
This morning, Iranian officials described the capture of that merchant vessel as a hijacking and an act of piracy. Now, we know that ship had been identified under U.S. sanctions, but it's not exactly clear what it was carrying. Matt?
Charlie, thank you. Now to the latest on those peace talks.
I love watching CBS News, Israel's favorite news broadcast. Like their coverage on this is somehow even worse than CNN. This is obviously the post-Ellison purchase CBS News. CNN pre-Ellison purchase is doing its very best to also broadcast as many pro-Israel positions as possible. Yeah, I mean, what do you say? What do you say? What can you say about everything that's going on? The idea that a double blockade is actually somehow going to open up the Iranian blockade, which the Iranian side said would actually release in good faith, specifically so they could continue along in their in the ceasefire process, only to have Donald Trump decide, no, actually, we're blockading extra hard. I don't know. I don't know what to say about it. What can you say about it? It's art of the deal, baby. That's where we're at. It costs $8 million a day to move a fucking carrier group, and these clowns think that we're going to intimidate Iran by doubling down. Yeah, I mean, Iran is obviously gearing up, it seems, for a war posture. And you can tell that they're doing that because the American side has decided to claim that there is a lot of instability on the Iranian side, which is not the case. The Tasnim news agency said, you know, oh, your stupid tweets are not going to change anything. And then the American analysts were like, see, they're dunking on Abbas Araghchi, and it was like, no, they were dunking on Trump. That's another thing that I've seen where people are trying to claim that there's a lot of like conflict and instability internally on the Iranian side. And I think at the end of the day, the guys who are, you know, pulling the trigger are the ones who are in control of the show. So
we're expecting as soon as today. The Trump administration announced the meeting would take place in Islamabad, Pakistan, but Iran says that's not happening. Nicole Killian is at the White House. Nicole, good morning. Now, the talks are on, then they're off. The Strait of Hormuz is open, then perhaps closed. So can you help us sort this out?
Hey, good morning to you, Matt. It's really hard to tell exactly where things stand given these new tensions. Right now, the U.S. and Iran can't seem to agree if new negotiations are actually taking place, and that is casting greater uncertainty over what could happen as a fragile ceasefire is about to expire within days.
Sources tell CBS News Vice President J.D. Vance is expected to lead the delegation President Trump is dispatching to new talks in Pakistan. But so far, Iran says it isn't ready to commit, citing Washington's excessive demands, constant shifts in stance, and an ongoing naval blockade, according to Iranian state media.
The president's
I mean, look, I can't speak for the rest of the world, but like obviously the American government's assessment here is going to be pro-America, and they're basically going to shift the blame over to Iran, even though Iran has been the stable partner, the reliable partner in this ceasefire process. They've been a lot more invested in maintaining some semblance of stability and also following the escalation ladder as America and Israel keep going up the escalation ladder, opening up civilian targets and all this stuff. Like, I know it sounds ridiculous to hear, but, and especially if you are, especially if you've seen a lifetime of like pro-America sentiment and that Iran is like dangerous and a malignant actor, you're going to hear me say that and go, that's an insane statement. But it's not an insane statement. It's just the truth. And the reality of the matter is, if we had more honest global leaders, they would say the truth. Like, this is why yesterday I brought up the fact that like Russia could be considered a rogue actor for sure, like a rogue state that doesn't abide by the same standards. But America and Israel are on a totally different level when it comes to being a rogue state, a rogue actor. They have been unbelievably belligerent. They are so destructive, not just destructive towards loss of life, targeting civilian infrastructure, but also destructive as far as like international human rights goes. They violate it with regular frequency. All of the rules of war, all of the standards that were previously placed, created by the United States of America in large part, have been violated here, where The attitude is might makes right. It's the law of the jungle. Whoever gets to enact the maximum amount of damage gets to do so with no pushback whatsoever. That is the American assessment here, right? That's the American standard here. And now Iran has shown that it has the capacity to fight back. And that has kind of ruined the might makes right politics of the United States of America. Because when you have a country that's crazy enough to actually withstand tremendous attacks from the United States of America and willing to commit to creating a military deterrence, well, we see the results, right? It's complete chaos, complete instability. And now America is the party that is forced to be restrained, which they refuse to do so. I mean, the host said that the talks failed because of criteria according to Iran, not that you give an insane statement yourself, not that you don't do that.
Prepared to escalate, to de-escalate.
On Face the Nation, UN Ambassador Michael Waltz said if Iran doesn't make a deal, the president is prepared to follow through on his renewed threat to knock out every single power plant and every single bridge in Iran. Trump added, no more Mr. Nice Guy.
Anybody who has dealt with the Iranians will tell you it is often 2 steps forward, 3 steps back.
With the ceasefire due to expire this week, both the U.S. and Iran accusing...
It's really funny. Everything that we say about Iran is actually about us, right? Like, if we're looking at the situation seriously, conducting sober analysis, it's so obvious that we are the belligerent party here. And we just keep saying, we just consistently project the things that we are doing onto our foreign adversaries. It's very, very interesting. Like, oh, you can't deal with these guys. They're madmen. They're insane. And it's funny to do that while the news coverage, like the anchor literally reads, Donald Trump said he's going to blow up all the bridges and all the power plants. And then boom, you go to the American envoy who's like, yeah, Iran is crazy. You can't deal with them diplomatically. They're crazy. It's like, well, you just described us being crazy. We're the crazy ones. We're the ones who you can't really deal with. I mean, the whole point started, this whole conflict started because there was already a negotiation. There was already a negotiation process. And instead of going through the negotiation process, we decided to use the negotiation process to start bombing Iran with a decapitation strike and blowing up, double tapping a school with little schoolgirls going to it in Minab. We are a malignant force in the world.
Each other of breaking the agreement by blocking the Strait of Hormuz, despite both sides declaring Friday that it was completely open. Iran's new supreme leader, who hasn't been seen publicly since the start of the war, warned in a weekend statement that Iran is ready to, quote, make its enemies taste the bitterness of new defeat. At home, Democrats are demanding a quick end to the conflict.
The president launched us into this war, and now he really doesn't know how to get out of it.
The president's energy secretary previously pledged gas prices would fall below $3 within 3 weeks. Now he says it could take a lot longer.
That could happen later this year. That might not happen till next year.
According to AAA, the average price for a...
It's just crazy because, like, this is the only thing that Americans give a shit about, too. Like all the instability that we're causing around the world, all of the death and destruction, none of that matters as much as like how much more an American is paying at the pump, you know? I mean, I guess you take it wherever you can, right? I guess if this is a radicalizing moment for the average American, you use that to your advantage. You explain to them that like it goes beyond this, you know? Foreign policy is interconnected with domestic policy. What you don't have here is because of what we're wasting over there. You know, this is an argument that you can present to people and should present to people. I just, you know, it's crazy. Like from the perspective of the average American, all the stuff that Israel did in Gaza was, you know, it was bad. It was fucked up. Sure. Some people saw it. They were like, oh, that's gross. I don't even want to think about it. But that was still happening over there. It was happening with our tax dollars. Some people paid attention to it. Some people were frustrated. But the real reason, as I always said, the real reason why like a lot of Americans hate Israel now isn't just because Israel was committing a genocide. The average American hates Israel because They were committing a genocide and being really fucking annoying about the whole thing. Oh, Jesus, that was crazy. That was wild. M. Israel Chai, I apologize. I apologize. As always, M. Israel Chai, M. Israel Chai. That was Israel is a tiny nation, size of New Jersey, should be the size of the tri-state, in my opinion. It's too tiny. It should be larger. M. Israel Chai. Okay. Yeah. Now I'm glad that we got that out of the way, though. That was good. Should be fine going forward, hopefully, inshallah. And yeah. All right. Where were we? All right. News. President Trump just told me over the phone that he disagrees with Energy Secretary Chris Wright's assessment that gas prices may not drop until next year. No, I think he's wrong on that. Totally wrong, Trump said. When I asked how soon we can expect to see prices come down, Trump said, as soon as this ends. Cool. When will it end? I don't know. Anyway, as I was saying, the only thing the only thing that the average American cares about is how hard their wallets are hurting as a consequence of this. And, we take what we can get, I guess.
Gallon of regular is $4.04, up nearly $1 since last year. Secretary Wright says he believes energy prices have peaked and will come down once the conflict ends. Nate?
Nicole, thank you.
Yesterday afternoon, and the Iranian-flagged cargo vessel Tuska apparently ignoring warnings by klaxon and then radio to stop from U.S. Navy destroyer Spruance.
Motor vessel Toska, vacate your engine room. Vacate your engine room. We're prepared to subject you to disabling fire.
The U.S. Navy said this shows the destroyer firing 3 small munitions designed to stop Tuska, but neither sink her nor set her ablaze. They also released what they say is video of Marines from another ship abseiling to the deck of the Tuska and seizing control of the vessel. Tuska had left port in Malaysia bound for Iran, attacked, immobilized, boarded, impounded on approach to the Strait of Hormuz. President Trump said the ship tried to get past our naval blockade. It did not go well for them. But what now? And that's a question being asked ever more loudly of this war. Another rally in support of the regime in Tehran last night. Iran accusing America of an act of piracy.
Yeah, it was coming back. It wasn't even leaving the strait. Iranian tankers, for the most part, are going to China. So we haven't really stopped any of the Iranian tankers that have crossed the Strait of Hormuz. A couple have. In the Shadow Fleet. We haven't really stopped those because those are going to China, and that would be a direct, I guess, a direct military intervention against Chinese interests, and we don't really have the smoke for that. But this one was coming back
for firing on and seizing the ship. It will be avenged, they said. And those peace talks in Pakistan, well, the security cordon is in place in Islamabad. The Americans said they were going yesterday, then didn't, because Iran says there's nothing to talk about, accusing the US of making unrealistic demands and contradictory threats.
As of now, as I'm speaking to you, we have no plan for the next round of negotiations. No decision has been taken in this regard.
Last time out, Vance, Witkoff, Kushner and team got precisely nothing in Islamabad. Tonight, Trump said they're heading back for round 2. Iran is said to be looking positively at the latest.
Yeah, so this is also a little bit inconsistent. America says they're sending their envoys, whereas Iran says they're not. Iran has stated, at least like the last time I checked in before I went to do the podcast, Iran was like, we're not sending our envoys because you haven't shown good faith. And what's interesting about this, of course, is that the ceasefire was a 2-week process and it's supposed to end tomorrow. Also, yes, JD did say in Islamabad, this is the final and best offer, which obviously goes again. Like, I mean, it shows America's hand once again. For Iran, though, they want the American blockade to end, and they thought that the American blockade would end. So the fact that American naval assets are still limiting transit implies that America is not abiding by what Iran thought was going to be good faith initiatives. There's already very little trust between the Iranian parties and the American side for understandable reasons. I mean, this is what, the third time that the Trump administration, Trump directly has like fucked them over. The first was when he first came into office, destroyed the JCPOA, added additional sanctions onto Iran, even though Iran was following the negotiation in spite of the fact that Donald Trump said JCPOA is over. The second time was obviously leading up to the 12-day war, where Donald Trump said, oh, let's get to the negotiations. And then in the negotiations process, Trump used the negotiations to start the first strike that Israel committed to. And then the last instance of perfidy, of course, was 52 days ago. Operation Epic Fortnight, the start of Operation Epic Fortnight. This was when Iran had conceded to many of the maximalist demands that America was making as far as what to do with the enriched uranium and all this stuff. So, I mean, it's understandable that they would be a little bit reluctant to engage America in the negotiations process. But I guess they're going back to Islamabad. The American team is going back to Islamabad, and they're just going to talk to Pakistan. And then Pakistan will relay the information to Iran. As far as I understand, Iran is not going to show up to this, but that might change.
Deal, but they're still not yet ready for the boarding passes to Pakistan. Once again, the Americans look like the ones in a hurry. And Pakistan looks like the one doing a lot of the spade work. Its interior minister meeting and being seen to meet ambassadors from the US and Iran today to try somehow and get Islamabad too on the road. So if today should prove to be the eve of talks, what of the commanders who have now unleashed war upon Gaza, Yemen, Syria, Lebanon and Iran? Both today somehow smarting. Trump on social media berating his current abysmal poll ratings, dismissing it all as fake news, lies. Netanyahu speaking on Israel's Remembrance Day, claiming humanity's moral high ground.
But the world already recognizes our determination to defend ourselves. Not only to defend ourselves, but to defend humanity from barbaric fanaticism. Small Israel and our great friend, the United States, carry the entire Western civilization on their shoulders.
Some claim from a man who remains indicted by the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity.
Alex Thompson there. Well, the US president insisted again on social media today that the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, did not talk him into the war with Iran. Our US editor, Anushka Astana, is in Washington. Anushka.
You know, for a moment, we thought that Donald Trump was having a quiet day. He's certainly not speaking in public today. But as usual, his frustrations have bubbled over into a stream of social media posts. And through them, we can really see what is bothering him. The first, what you just mentioned, that critique he's getting actually from the left and right, the idea that Israel talked him into this war. He insists that's not true, that this is...
Yeah, it's... You know, that is going to be a little difficult for Donald Trump to deny at this point, right? I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu, Mike Johnson, Donald Trump himself, Marco Rubio, virtually every Democrat that was in the Gang of Eight meetings, pretty much everyone from the start was like, oh my God, you're doing this because Benjamin Netanyahu convinced you. Lindsey Graham openly admitted that it was Israel that gave him the talking points that he could use with Donald Trump. Don't know why they were so excited to reveal this information. Now that I look back at it, actually, 52 days in, I think they all, including Israel, legitimately believed that the Israeli intelligence was solid, was reliable, that like they would be able to do a quick in and out Venezuela-style regime change operation, and that Iran would never attack the GCC nations. Iran would never actually close the Strait of Hormuz. Iran would never have enough striking capabilities to continue pummeling Israel and the GCC nations and do a tremendous amount of damage to not just the global energy markets, but also to all of these countries in this neighborhood. And I guess that's the reason why they were so forthcoming about how, Israel gave us this awesome info and of course we were going to go in and we're just going to fuck shit up. It kind of feels like they were so forthcoming because they thought that this would not be a 52-day quagmire at this point. With no end in sight. They must have assumed that this would be a very fast operation, that Iran is very weak. The CIA director and Joint Chiefs allegedly said the Mossad intelligence is dog shit, but Trump went with it anyway, according to that leak story. Yes. This has been a common thing. This has been a common theme with Israel. Israel greatly overestimates the might of its espionage capabilities, the might of its intelligence. Maybe they're even aware of its shortcomings, and yet they make it seem as though they're just like super capable. This is a common problem in the intelligence community. This is something that people yell about all the time. So that's not surprising to me. What's surprising to me is that America was stupid enough to believe it, and we're so forthcoming about the fact that they got this information from Israel and they were goaded into doing this for Israel. Like that part is actually pretty crazy. I assume, thinking about it now, I assume the reason why they were so open about it early on was because they thought they were going to succeed. Fast and easy, rapid in and out campaign, regardless of what the general said would be the worst possible scenario, which we're living currently. Regardless of what the American intelligence assessment was, which was that it would be the worst possible scenario, which we're living through currently. It must have been Trump's assessment that this will be fast and easy and good, and everyone will celebrate it, and they'll cherish him as the guy who finally ended this 47-year regime, right? It has to be that. Otherwise, it makes no sense to just come out of the gates swinging about how Israel goaded me, the president of the United States of America, into engaging in this unbelievably stupid first strike.
Something he has wanted to address for his entire life. The second one is the critique that he may end up with a deal that is no better or even worse than the one that Barack Obama got in 2015 without a war. Again, Donald Trump says absolutely not true. The third is about the timing of all of this. He's put out a post in which he's talking about World War I lasting over 4 years, World War II over 6 years, suggesting that it hasn't been that long here. And he is also really frustrated with the overall narrative. He's hitting out at the media. He's even hitting out at the polling, saying that polling is rigged. And I think there are two types of polling that will be bothering him. There's global polling. Public First in recent days put out something that suggested in Canada, in the UK, in Germany, in France, the public are more likely to say their country should depend on China over the US under Donald Trump. But also here in the US, domestic polling shows 2/3 of Americans blame Donald Trump for the rise in petrol prices.
So is it panic stations in the White House?
Oh, I think they are pretty worried about it. You know, Donald Trump is talking about winning in Iran, but they're worrying about whether or not they can win in Congress in the midterms that are coming up. And there is a belief that petrol, gas prices are absolutely critical to how the Republicans can do. Politico are reporting that Donald Trump's chief of staff, Susie Wiles, is holed up in a Washington hotel with Republican strategists trying to discuss how they can get the messaging right about all of this. And for all the president says that he's not worried about all of this, it is pretty clear that he is, and there is some confusion at the moment about what is happening in terms of the delegation, the US delegation going to Pakistan. He said they'd already gone. We're now told by sources that they're going to go soon.
Anushka, thanks very much. Well, earlier I spoke to Hamid Reza Azizi, an expert on Iranian security and former lecturer at the University of Tehran. I began by asking him if he believes the Iranians will show up to the talks that, as we've been hearing, are due to begin in Pakistan tomorrow.
Well, the problem for the Iranian leadership is that they are caught between a rock and a hard place, in the sense that Donald Trump seems convinced that his coercive diplomacy is going to work. The Iranian leaders also need to balance any signal of diplomacy with their own support base inside the country, which is very ideologically oriented. and basically sees any sign of flexibility as a potential capitulations.
I mean, you talk about President Trump's strategy being coercive diplomacy. Others talk about sort of flip-flopping between threats and claiming victory and then more threats. But we've also seen what looks like some flip-flopping by the Iranians themselves. You know, first of all, reopening the Strait of Hormuz, then closing it again, saying earlier today they had...
This is how a negotiation works. Okay, if you get to the table to put together a ceasefire proposal and you abide by the agreement, you set the standards, you give your points, the opposition gives their points, and then you abide by those standards that were set forth. And in order to show that you are following along in good faith, you start easing some of these restrictions. For the Iranian side, from what I understand, I'm not entirely certain as to how much easing of the restrictions the Iranians were committed to, whether it would be fully opening the Strait of Hormuz or whether it be allowing ships to cross through on the preordained route led by the IRGC Navy, or just like complete transiting of all ships through the strait. I'm not entirely certain on which of those two things was going to be the case. But regardless, like, Iran said that they were going to ease the restrictions on the Strait of Hormuz, and then America was, from what I understand, also going to no longer have the second block right outside the strait, the naval block that they've implemented. America, on the other hand, did not do that. Donald Trump literally said, "Oh, Iran capitulated to everything we wanted. They suck. They're weak pussies. They're cowards. Also, we're not letting any of those ships go through, regardless. Here, we took over an Iranian cargo ship that was going back into Iran. And of course, like, if that's the case, then yeah, that's not a flip-flop. That's just the Iranian side going, okay, well, I guess we're not opening the Strait of Hormuz then. If you're not going to abide by your side of the deal, then we're not going to just give you everything you wanted. That's not how diplomacy works, especially when you have that leverage, especially when you have that upper hand. You have to, once again, show that you have the upper hand. It doesn't make any sense. And most analysts that I have seen, from Danny Citrinowicz to Sina Tusi to Trita Parsi, most of the analysts, regardless of whether they agree with one another ideologically or not, doesn't matter, have said it's because Donald Trump, and this is the singular unifying factor in all of the analysis. Everyone keeps repeatedly saying Donald Trump mistakes any kind of negotiations as weakness. In his mind, the very fact that the opposition is coming to the ceasefire table, to the ceasefire negotiations table, implies that they're weak, implies that they've lost. That's not how this works. That's not how any treaties are conducted historically. Sure, one side has an upper hand, absolutely. But in this circumstance, if you look at the actual situation on the ground, if you look at the reality on the ground, Iran has the leverage. And it's also something that the American side understands. And they understand it so much that they were trying to set this ceasefire deal up in Islamabad to begin with. It was the American side that was like actively trying to get Iran to the table. And Iran was like, no, we're going to continue. We haven't established sufficient military deterrence. So if you're doing that, then you're equipped with the knowledge, or at least someone in the American team is equipped with the knowledge that in a game of attrition, Iran has the capacity to wait out the United States of America and wait out Israel, because it can absorb a lot more economic damage than America and capital interests can, because international capital needs stability, right? There's a little bit of volatility where capital owners can make money, but too much volatility, too much instability, and especially a closure of the Strait of Hormuz, all of a sudden, nobody's making money, right? There's great instability all around the world. For Iran, because they have been forcibly pushed out of the international marketplace, because they don't do regular trade, they are already used to this kind of volatile environment, and therefore are capable of absorbing a lot more economic damage than international capital is. That is leverage. That's a significant upper hand that Iran has as opposed to the rest of the world here. They've been forced to exist in this environment due to the sanctions anyway. So what every analyst is saying universally is that Trump, on the one hand, seemingly understands that reality, and therefore the American side has been actively begging the Iranians to come back to the negotiations table. But also, on the other hand, the way that Trump communicates and the way that Trump has final say almost implies that any kind of agreement from the Iranian side he treats as a weakness. There's an inconsistency here. And under normal circumstances, I would always try to find the rationale behind why certain world leaders behave in certain ways, right? But with Donald Trump, it's very difficult to identify exactly what the logical through line is because he's just a madman. You can look at previous trends, you can look at past performance and try to map out what is truly going on. Like one of the things that we can identify is whenever he says he's going to do terrorism, whenever he says he's going to blow up power plants, for example, that just means he's willing to do a negotiation. At least that's what has happened thus far, okay? As an agent of chaos, when he says, oh, I'm going to do the big bad, I'm going to do the genocide on Iran, I'm going to blow up all of your cultural landmarks, that means he's like actually willing to de-escalate. It's the exact opposite. At least that's how you can read it, judging by past performance. Danny Citrinowicz says, it's a mistake to live under illusions. Agree with Sina Tusi. Danny Citrinowicz from the Atlantic Council agreeing with a senior fellow at CI Policy, by the way. Very interesting time to be alive. These two people are directly at odds with one another as it pertains to foreign policy. One is a non-interventionist, anti-interventionist think tank. The other is a pro-liberal interventionist think tank. So when you got both of these guys agreeing with one another in their own assessments, understand that Trump has gotten so crazy that, you just kind of have to recognize that things are a little unstable. Iran is more likely, Danny says, Iran is more likely to escalate than accept a good deal that forces concessions on missiles, enrichment, Hormuz, or its regional proxies. The argument that a weakened Iran can be pushed into a favorable deal is flawed. Even if weakened, Iran is more likely to escalate than surrender. After weeks of sustained aerial pressure, it is already clear any large-scale military campaign will dramatically worsen regional and global economic consequences without forcing Iran to concede. At its core, forcing Iran to give up its missile program or enrichment would amount, in Tehran's eyes, to regime change. That is precisely why the Iranian leadership will resist it at all costs. There are no easy solutions, either a deal broadly resembling the previous nuclear agreement or escalation that leads not to resolution, but to a far more dangerous confrontation. Attempts to imagine a good deal ignore both the structural constraints and the realities we've seen unfold since the 28th of February. In hindsight, it is clear that a policy which completely ignored the nature of Iran's current leadership and relied primarily on wishful thinking has led us into a deeply problematic strategic reality. By ignoring the regime's ideological rigidity and decision-making patterns, this approach replaced strategy with illusion, and the results are now evident. Yeah, this also goes back to, again, that inconsistency that we're seeing with like the way that America is moving and the way that America is talking. On back channels, they're demanding that Iran get back to the ceasefire table to get back the negotiations. But Donald Trump, who has final say on these operations, is behaving as though there is no need for negotiations. And we hear some of the more insane versions of this whenever he goes on TV, where he says, like, we've destroyed the Iranian Navy, we've destroyed the Iranian military, Iran doesn't exist anymore, we've cratered Iran, their missile cities are gone. But then we look at observable reality, and it's obviously very different, right? Now, there's been a ceasefire for the past 2 weeks, so you can't tell, I guess, or maybe we forgot. But up until that ceasefire, Iran was pummeling the GCC and also Israel. So clearly, we had not attrited their striking capabilities. We had not destroyed nearly enough TELs, which are replaceable and easy to fix. And not only that, but perhaps more importantly, we had not established full-blown aerial superiority over the Iranian airspace. And that's and the observable reality there is by looking at the weapons that America was using. We deployed and expended a tremendous number of our standoff munitions, which are missiles that you use from afar rather than the unguided or guided gravity bombs that you normally would use, which we have virtually infinite supply of. Not infinite, but close to infinite supply of, as opposed to the standoff munitions. We're not using those because those are dropped from airplanes. And if you haven't established air superiority, if you haven't created a no-fly zone over Iranian airspace in the way that Trump is claiming, air superiority, yes, but not air supremacy, sure. But even if there was air superiority, you wouldn't have had so many planes fall out of the sky. That's just the reality. It would be easier for American flights to conduct their missions without having to withstand anti-air defense systems. And it's very clear that Iran still has denial capabilities, anti-air defense systems, and that's precisely the reason why there was a search and rescue mission that took place, right? I mean, that's because they dropped an F-15 over Iranian airspace. They dropped a Warthog in the process as well. They still have capabilities of defending the Iranian airspace. So once again, you don't just listen to what the American side is saying. You have to look at what the American side is doing. So by ignoring the regime's ideological rigidity, it's time to fundamentally rethink our assumptions and strategy towards Iran before the situation deteriorates even further. Instead of weakening the regime and reshaping the Middle East for the better, the opposite has occurred. It has been significantly strengthened, especially amongst its core supporters. As a result, the region now risks moving into a more dangerous direction with a more radical and more assertive Iran at its center. And the only think tank, it seems, that still operates inside of Washington that has the president's ear, unfortunately, is the Benjamin Netanyahu think tank, Foundation for Defending Democracy, FDD. And they're the only guys who are like, things are going great, actually. We should just be extra hard. We should do more of the strikes. We should continue waging war against Iran. We shouldn't stop until Iran is destroyed. And everybody else is like, no, you're a fucking idiot. This is an unbelievable catastrophe. It has greatly diminished American force projection capabilities around the globe. It has made our footing with our allies, not just in the region, but certainly outside of the region, in the Asia region, for example, Asia Pacific region, far worse. It is causing everyone to recalculate American security cooperation agreements. We're losing our standing with our Western allies in NATO. We're losing our standing with the Asia Pacific allies. We've frustrated everyone, both because of the economic damage that they have to withstand, the energy crisis that they're currently going through. As Donald Trump keeps saying over and over again, it's not our problem, it's your problem, even though he caused the problem to begin with. It's a spectacular defeat. Hard to see how the violent spike in inflation and shortages in East and South Asia brought on by Trump's war on Iran doesn't eventually spike inflation and economic pain in the US and Europe. There is a delayed response here in the United States of America because all the commodities that they make over there that they're not going to be able to make or make in a much more costly manner is inevitably going to lead to inflation in the American markets as well. Just as our oil that we receive from the Strait of Hormuz comes, almost a month after everyone else receives it, we have a delayed response here, a delayed impact on the inflationary crisis that we've brought about the rest of the world. But it's going to happen. And of course, markets, as expected, are behaving in this unbelievably irrational manner because everyone is just holding on to the idea that as long as we all make it seem like things are going to be fine, then eventually things will be fine and we'll keep making money. Many countries across the Asia Pacific are experiencing sudden jolts of disruption that they are struggling to manage, with some comparing the crisis breakdowns to the scope of the COVID pandemic. Even if there's a peace deal soon, the future of this industrious region that has driven global economic growth for decades will likely include months of canceled flights, surging food prices, factory pauses, delayed shipment, and empty shelves for products long considered quick and easy to buy worldwide. Plastic bags, instant noodles, vaccines, syringes, lipstick, microchips, and sportswear. Collectively, according to many officials and experts, if the war's strangling of commercial traffic through the Middle East lasts for even a few more weeks and uncertainty lingers, shortages could push several countries into convulsions of unrest followed by recession. Polyester and nylon are also derived from petroleum. In the sewing hubs of Bangladesh, Gazipur, and Ashulia, where clothes are made from Walmart, Zara, and Uniqlo, severe disruptions to production and shipment schedules are common and on track to worsen. The strain we are under now, managing it will become very tough if there's no continuity in gas or fuel supply, said Abdullah Hil Naqib, deputy managing director of Team, a Bangladeshi garment factory group. We are seeing that the prices of our raw materials are also rising. Today, the price of thread has almost doubled. So they see it immediately. We see it in a delayed manner because this touches everything. The international trade system is interwoven. Everything is interconnected. So you might assume, oh, we're in America. How does this impact us? We don't get our oil from the Strait of Hormuz, even though we do, but it's like, minor. It still has downstream consequences on increasing the price of goods that you purchase. A lot of people don't understand that for some weird reason. We act as though we assume that like we're totally operating with a different industrial base. We are not. The entire world is getting their goods, especially the Western world. They're getting their goods from the Asia Pacific region, right? That's where all of the things that we consume and things that we purchase, things that we use are being produced. So if they don't get their oil, if they don't get their gas from the Strait of Hormuz, which is where they get their oil and gas from, then they can't produce things. If they can't produce things, you can't have the components necessary for production even happening in the Western world. Or you can't get the commodities in the Western world at all. If the price goes up, then your price goes up because everything is interconnected. Americans have a very hard time comprehending this reality for some weird reason. This is precisely the reason why the stranglehold that Iran has over the Strait of Hormuz is so devastating and will have long-term reverberations, long-term global consequences, and they've already begun.
No plans to join the talks, and in the last hour or so saying they're positively thinking about it. What's happening here on their side?
I think these two are kind of related to each other, and there's a kind of a vicious circle created by the decisions on one side that impacts the strategic moves on the other side.
But some of the contradictory messages, some people would say, coming out from the Iranians themselves. The question is that a strategy, or isn't it true that there are clearly different factions fighting for control here?
I don't see it as a sign of infighting, but as I said, as a sign of a regime under pressure that it impacts, it restricts its flexibility and room for maneuvering, and also leads to these contradictions. So contradictions do exist, but the way they should be interpreted, I think it's a bit different than how it is recently.
We have to focus on community and shopping locally if we're going to make it through this. Buddy, I need you to understand something, okay? There is no local community support if certain things that you have taken for granted that you utilize in your day-to-day lives, like, I mean, syringes, right? Like, they were just bringing up syringes. Like, what do? You can't locally source syringes. Like, that's not a thing that happens. That's not something you can do. If syringes are being made in a factory in India, and now that factory in India doesn't have the necessary resources to keep up with the output, all of a sudden, syringes are going to be infinitely more costly, right? Places are not going to be able to purchase them. It's just not a thing that you can overcome through the local barter process, right? Yeah, nitrogen for fertilizer is transported through the Hormuz. Just go to the local fertilizer producer in my town, bro. It doesn't work like that, right? And America already doesn't have the manufacturing base regardless. Even cotton too. My job emailed us saying that the price of organic cotton yarn went up 7 to 10% over the last week, and it was already expensive with the previous tariffs. We already took our prices up to compensate, but might have to do more. You are very wrong. All my favorite pistachios, coffee beans, and jalapeno poppers are made locally in my American suburban backyard. Surely none of this will be affected. Yeah. We here in the United States take for granted this global design, this global trade design that we have implemented and have, benefited from tremendously. But we don't understand that all of this is a very fragile system. It's all unbelievably fragile. And for the longest time, as long as America was the only disruptive force and was choosing its enemies wisely, even if it was an enemy that could fight back like the Vietnamese, it was somewhat sheltered from the rest of the somewhat did not have the capacity to disrupt global trade in the same meaningful fashion as Iran is able to by controlling the Strait of Hormuz, it was fine, right? Afghanistan, it was fine overall. It wasn't fine for the Afghan population. It wasn't fine for the Iraqi population, but it was fine for the rest of the world, right? America came into Iraq, for example, and immediately secured the Ministry of Energy, right? That was the first thing that we did. Why did we do that? Well, because Iraq is an oil producer and we wanted to make sure that the assets were protected. So this is a different situation because the damage, the impact is always going to be global. It's not just a localized impact. There is localized impact as well, but the long-term consequences will be global. And America still very much operates in the global in the global trade design. And therefore, we will absolutely experience long-term shocks as a consequence of this.
Discussed in the mainstream discussions, actually.
And in terms of what all of this means, should these talks go ahead for the chance of a lasting peace, what's your assessment?
I think there should be some sort of a face-saving off-ramp. I can imagine that if President Trump, for example, decides to, even temporarily, remove this naval blockade or say that, it's not going to be imposed as strictly as it was, at least in the past 48 hours, like confiscating Iranian ships. If that happens, that would give some room for maneuver to the Iranian delegation to go there. Because as I said, they also need a deal. Just to give you some statistics, 2 million people have lost their jobs as a result of this war, directly or indirectly. The other day, the spokesperson of the Iranian government said that the cost of reconstructing the country after the war is something around $270 billion. So this is what they need. And they certainly don't want to go back to war, but coercive diplomacy seems not to be working because of the perils that would pose to the regime from inside.
Hamid Reza Azizi, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
In July 2024, Secretary Blinken claimed Iran was 1 or 2 weeks away from having enough fissile material, breakout capacity to eventually make a weapon if Iran had decided.
Yeah, Democrats, man. For years and years, we kept up this ridiculous lie that Iran was days away from having nuclear arms, that, Iran was a very dangerous, unstable actor in this region. You should read that regardless of who's saying it as Israeli propaganda, because that's precisely what it was. The only actor in this region that Iran was a real, genuine threat to was Israel, okay? And that's precisely why Israel kept repeatedly saying this over and over again. And that's why a lot of our Israel first politicians also kept repeatedly saying this over and over again. And that's precisely the reason why, like a lot of the Democrats, after spending the last, 30, 40 years repeating this ridiculous lie, are kind of having a hard time communicating exactly why they oppose what Donald Trump is doing, right? We've been gearing up for this moment. We've been at least doing propaganda for this exact moment for the longest time.
To do so. There were indirect negotiations that the Biden administration did, but it went nowhere. So when President Trump argues that he did when no other president would, is it just simply that the bill was coming due and it fell on his watch?
I do think there's a certain element to that. And that's...
This is Amos Hochstein, okay? Amos Hochstein, served in the IDF, by the way, was the advisor to the former President Joe Biden. Alongside Brett McGurk, Amos Hochstein, once again, served in the IDF, was formative in Biden's Middle Eastern design. He was one of the key architects of Biden's bear hug strategy and unlimited support for the nation state of Israel as Israel was doing a genocide. Okay? Just so you understand. It was two key guys, Amos Hochstein and Brett McGurk. So the question being presented is being presented to Amos Hochstein. So he's a good guy? Yeah, the best guy. No, he's not a good guy. These guys are unbelievably evil, okay? They're bloodthirsty warmongers. Democratic partisans have been pointing to Trump's war for weeks to chide Hasan Piker and anyone else they blame. Read everyone but themselves for losing in 2024. But it turns out the Biden admin was planning to attack Iran if they won a second term.
There were direct negotiations that the Biden administration did, but it went nowhere. So when President Trump argues that he did when no other president would, is it just simply that the bill was coming due and it fell on his watch?
I do think there's a certain element to that. And that's why I was supportive of President Trump joining in June.
Yeah, so was Brett. So was Brett McGurk. If you remember, Brett McGurk went on CNN and was like, this is awesome, the 12-day war. During the 12-day war, Brett McGurk would go on CNN every day and be like, oh, this is so sick. We actually trained for this exact same situation when Biden was president. If you recall, I covered it at the time. Brett McGurk would go on CNN every single day and say, we trained for this. We should get a little bit of the credit too. What a beautiful sight.
To take the strikes that we had thought internally in the Biden administration we may have to take if there was a second term. We thought that the spring, summer of 2025 was probably, we may have to be there in the same place. And we did war games. We did some practice runs on what it would look like to look into it. And because that may have had to happen under our watch as well. But he said we obliterated their nuclear program. The question then is not about what he did in June. This war we were in now.
Why? Why did we have to do this at all? Why does no one in the media go, I don't understand. Why do we have to do this? Who is this a threat to? Don't you feel like the current predicament is a far graver threat to the rest of the world than anything prior to our military intervention here at the behest of Israel? It's just totally ridiculous. No one ever asked that question, like, why are we attacking Iran? That's never the question. The question is, how are we attacking Iran? Why haven't we been able to destroy Iran? How long will it take to destroy Iran? No one ever asks, why are we attacking Iran? What are we doing? Why are we attacking Iran when the only time, if the nukes are a real threat, okay, if the nukes are a real threat, if it's a significant threat that Iran has nuclear arms, which, by the way, I don't think it would be a threat at all. I think it would be, the region would be more stable if Iran had nukes. I am totally in agreement with Professor Mersheimer, who advanced this theory, right? Some may say it's the Hasanabi nuclear sovereignty doctrine. Sure, that's fine. But outside of that, like, you can ask the question, why? Why are we fighting against Iran? If we are worried about Iran developing nuclear arms, then the only successful attempts at restraining Iran's nuclear ambitions was during the JCPOA. So it's clear that diplomacy is the only successful method here. So why should we be attacking Iran? Why have we attacked Iran? Donald Trump ripped apart the JCPOA, and Iran went back to enriching uranium beyond civilian usage. Clearly, they have done so to maintain some kind of leverage against the sanctions that we have implemented. That is a demand for negotiation. That's not a demand for war. That's not a real, a genuine interest in developing nuclear arms. That's just leverage. Leverage to bring the United States back to the negotiations process.
Did not attack the nuclear facilities again. Mm-hmm. This was not about the nuclear. So the question now becomes, can you do a deal with the Iranians? And the maximalist positions that both sides have are right now very far apart, despite all the rhetoric that we're almost there, or we are there, but if we're not there, we'll bomb the hell out of them.
Yeah.
In July
everyone's saying, like, oh, this is different. This is totally different. Trump is so irresponsible. Failed to consider that plenty of former Biden administration figures that were unbelievably pro-Israel and were certainly Israel first, Brett McGurk and Amos Hochstein are two key figures here, are saying we would do the same thing as well. As a matter of fact, we were training for this exact moment. And they've said that over and over again.